I was standing in my vineyard at dawn, watching the mist lift off the Pinot Noir vines, when I saw the black SUV roll up to my gate. 2 men stepped out wearing uniforms that looked like sheriff's deputies, tactical belts, badges, the whole show. They told me I had 14 days to comply with HOA violations, or face fines up to $500 a day. Here's the problem. I'm not in their HOA, never was. My 15 acres sit 200 feet outside their precious Meadowbrook Estate's jurisdiction, and I've got the county records to prove it. But Meredith Locke, the HOA president, didn't care about facts. She wanted control, so she sent her fake cops onto my property. They broke my gate, threatened me with arrest, and all caught on camera. That's when I called the real sheriff. Deputy Luke Merritt arrived 8 minutes later, and the moment he handcuffed that fake cop, Meredith watched it happen live on her laptop. She regretted it instantly. What came next destroyed her career and put her security chief behind bars. Here's exactly how it went down. The first light came soft over the ridge, turning the Pinot Noir vines gold at the edges. I stood at the fence line with my coffee, watching the fog settle between the rows. September mornings in Sonoma County felt like this. Quiet. The kind of quiet that made you believe the world still had room for people who just wanted to be left alone. I'd bought this land 6 years ago, 15 acres of red dirt and gnarled vines. And I'd built something here that didn't need anyone's permission. No HOA meetings, no covenants, just grapes, dirt, and the county line 200 feet to the west, where Meadowbrook Estates started and my freedom ended. That morning, the quiet broke. I saw the black Chevy Tahoe first, parked just outside my gate on the gravel turnout, engine running, windows tinted dark. It sat there for 20 minutes while I finished my coffee. And I knew someone was watching. Not the friendly kind of watching, either. This was the kind where someone sat behind the wheel with a clipboard, taking notes, building a file. I'd seen it before in my old life as a forensic accountant. People building cases always started with surveillance. I set my mug down on the fence post and walked toward the road. By the time I got halfway there, the Tahoe pulled away, slow and deliberate, like whoever was inside wanted me to know they'd been there. I didn't think much of it until I checked the mailbox. The envelope was plain white. No stamp, no return address. Someone had driven out here and placed it by hand. I opened it, standing right there on the shoulder of Oak Ridge Road, Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, big serif font, little clip art logo. Under that, in bold red letters, it said, "Notice of violation. Immediate action required." I read it twice, and the second time I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so blatantly wrong. "Your property violates community aesthetic standards," it said. "Overgrown vegetation is visible from Oak Ridge Road. Unpermitted structure. Tool shed. Non-compliant fencing. You have 14 days to comply or face fines of up to $500 per day." Here's the thing. I wasn't in their HOA. Never had been. I walked back to my office, a converted tool shed with a desk and a filing cabinet. I pulled the warranty deed from the drawer and spread it on the desk. There it was, clear as printed ink. My property line ended 200 feet east of Meadowbrook's boundary, surveyed, recorded, and filed with Sonoma County under parcel number 123456789. When I bought this land in 2018, the first thing I did was make sure I was outside any HOA jurisdiction. I wasn't guessing. I had documentation. So either someone at Meadowbrook couldn't read a map, or they didn't care. I called the county recorder's office. The woman who answered confirmed it in under 2 minutes. "Your parcel is not within Meadowbrook Estates HOA boundaries," she said. I thanked her, hung up, and wrote the date and time in my notebook. Linda Cortez, county recorder. Documentation wasn't just smart, it was survival. That afternoon, the Tahoe came back. This time, there were 2 men. They parked in the same spot, got out, and stood at my fence line like they were surveying land they owned. One of them had a camera, the other had a clipboard. I was pulling weeds between the rows when I saw them, and I straightened up slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. I walked toward the fence. The closer I got, the clearer they became. Both men wore dark polo shirts with a logo stitched on the chest, Meadowbrook Security. But it wasn't just the logo. One of them wore a tactical belt, black nylon, the kind cops use. I could see the outline of handcuff holders, a pepper spray canister, a radio holster. His boots were polished. His stance was wide, authoritative. Everything about him screamed law enforcement, except he wasn't. The one with the camera raised it and took a photo of my shed, my fence, and my truck parked under the oak tree. The other one wrote something down. I stopped about 10 feet from the fence and called out, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" They didn't answer. The one with the clipboard glanced at me, then at his partner, and they both turned and walked back to the Tahoe. No words, no explanation. Just got in, started the engine, and drove off toward Meadowbrook. I stood there in the middle of the road, holding the HOA letter in one hand, watching that black SUV disappear around the curve. The dust hung in the air long after they were gone. I walked back to the office and added 2 more notes to my timeline. 3:15 p.m., Black Tahoe returns. 2 men, a camera, and a clipboard. California plate 8, FGH912, tactical belt, law enforcement appearance, no verbal contact. I set my pen down and leaned back. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridge, and the light turned orange across the vineyard. It was still beautiful, still quiet, but something had shifted. They were watching, and for some reason, they wanted me to know it. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of my own wine, and I thought about what happens when people mistake silence for weakness. I'd spent most of my adult life tracing money through shell companies, finding the patterns people thought they'd hidden. I knew how power worked. Real power didn't need to announce itself. It didn't send letters. It didn't stand at your fence with cameras. What I was looking at wasn't power. It was a theater. Someone was trying to scare me off my own land, and they were doing it badly. That told me 2 things. First, they didn't know who they were dealing with. And second, they were going to escalate. I finished my wine, went inside, and opened my laptop. That tactical belt kept nagging at me. The polished boots. The radio holster. Security guards didn't dress like that, unless they were trying to look like something else. I typed Wade Prentiss, Sonoma County into the search bar, remembering I'd seen that name somewhere on a Meadowbrook community forum months back. The first result was a news article from 2019. Deputy Wade Prentiss, fired after excessive force complaint. I clicked it, read it, and suddenly, the men at the fence made a lot more sense. Mara Devlin showed up the next morning with 2 empty wine bottles and a nervous smile. She lived 3 houses down from the Meadowbrook entrance, inside the HOA boundary, and she'd been buying my wine for the last 2 years. Good customer, friendly neighbor, the kind of person who waved from her car and didn't ask questions about my business. But that morning, when she pulled up in her silver Honda and stepped out holding those bottles, I could see something was different. She didn't wave. She glanced back toward the road like she was checking to see if anyone had followed her. I met her on the porch. The sun was already climbing, turning the air warm and dry. She handed me the bottles and said she wanted to buy 2 more of the Pinot from last season, but her voice was quieter than usual. We sat down at the small table under the overhang, and I poured us each a glass from an open bottle I kept inside. She took a sip, looked at the wine like she was studying it, and then she said it. "Elias, I heard Meredith Locke mention your farm at the HOA meeting last week. She told the board, 'Your property makes the neighborhood look,' and I'm quoting here, 'rustic and unkempt.' She said it's lowering property values." I set my glass down and leaned back in the chair. Mara wouldn't look at me. She stared at the wine, swirling it slowly. I asked her what else Meredith said. Mara hesitated, then told me Meredith wanted the board to explore legal options for forcing compliance on adjacent properties. Adjacent properties. That was me. I was the only property adjacent to Meadowbrook that wasn't part of the HOA. Mara left 20 minutes later with her 2 bottles, but before she drove off, she put her hand on my arm and said, "Be careful with her, Elias. Meredith doesn't like being told no." I watched her car disappear down the gravel road, and I thought about that phrase, "doesn't like being told no." That was the understatement of the year. Around noon, I heard the drone. I was working in the vineyard. tying back some of the canes that had grown wild over the summer. When I heard the high-pitched whine above me, I looked up and saw it hovering maybe 100 feet overhead. A DJI Phantom, white and black, with a camera gimbal hanging underneath. It wasn't moving fast. It was deliberate. Slow passes back and forth across my property, like whoever was flying it wanted a complete aerial survey. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and just stared at it. I didn't wave. I didn't yell. I just looked straight at the camera lens and let whoever was on the other end know I saw them. The drone hovered there for another 30 seconds, then banked east and flew back toward Meadowbrook. Then, late that afternoon, Wade Prentiss came to my gate. I was in the office, going over the harvest schedule. When I heard the engine, I looked out the window and saw the black Chevy Tahoe pull up to the fence line. This time, someone got out. The man from yesterday, maybe 50 years old, 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, same black polo with Meadowbrook security chief embroidered across the chest, same tactical belt. But today I could see his face clearly. Aviator sunglasses, a thick neck, the kind of build that came from years in a gym, not from farm work. His jaw was set tight, and when he walked toward my gate, his gait had that wide-legged cop swagger. Everything about him screamed law enforcement, but the details still didn't add up. No badge number, no county name. I walked out to the gate, but I didn't open it. I stopped about 10 feet back, hands in my pockets, and waited. He looked at me through those sunglasses and said, "Sir, I need to talk to you about multiple code violations on this property." His voice was loud, authoritative, the kind of voice used to get compliance. I kept my tone even. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said. "You have no jurisdiction here." He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who thought he had all the cards. "That's not how I see it," he said. "Your property affects the community. We have the right to enforce standards." I tilted my head slightly. "Show me the legal document that proves that," I said. His smile faded. He stepped closer to the gate, close enough that I could see my reflection in his sunglasses. "Don't play smart with me," he said. "You've got 14 days to fix those violations. After that, we'll take action." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "What kind of action?" He tapped his hand on the pepper spray canister. "The kind you won't like," he said. Then he turned, walked back to the Tahoe, and drove off. I stood there for a moment, then pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the Tahoe as it disappeared down the road. Back in the office, I added everything to my evidence folder. The photo, the timestamp, his exact words. "Don't play smart with me. We'll take action. The kind you won't like." Threats disguised as warnings. That night, I sat at my desk with the lights off, looking out at the vineyard under the moonlight. I thought about the article I'd found the night before. Wade Prentiss, fired from the sheriff's department for excessive force. And now he was here, wearing a costume, threatening me on behalf of an HOA that had no authority over my land. Meredith Locke wasn't just trying to pressure me. She was trying to scare me off, and she'd hired someone with a history of violence to do it. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the vines. The escalation was clear now. A letter, surveillance, a drone, and now a disgraced ex-cop playing security chief, standing at my gate, making threats. I wasn't scared. I was something else. I was ready. I spent the next morning doing what I did best, analyzing patterns. My office used to be a tool shed before I converted it. One window, one desk, one filing cabinet. I pulled out my notebook and laid it flat, reviewing everything I'd documented since September 12th. Black Tahoe, HOA letter, Mara's warning, drone, Wade Prentiss. 5 events in 5 days, each one more aggressive than the last. It wasn't random. It was an escalation. Passive observation to active intimidation in less than a week. That wasn't an accident. That was a strategy. I stared at my notes and wrote one question at the bottom. What's the goal? If Meredith wanted me gone, why not just ignore me? My property didn't affect hers. The only thing my farm did was exist outside her control. And apparently, that was enough. If I wanted to understand what I was up against, I needed to see the paper trail. Sonoma County Courthouse sat 25 minutes south in Santa Rosa, a low brick building with a parking lot that was always half empty. I walked in through the front entrance, past the metal detectors, and found the public records office on the second floor. A woman behind the counter looked up when I approached. I told her I needed employment records for Wade Prentiss, former deputy with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, and incorporation documents for Meadowbrook Estates HOA. She nodded, typed something into her computer, and told me it would take about 15 minutes. I sat down in one of the plastic chairs by the window and waited. When she called my name, she handed me 2 file folders. The first one was thin, Wade's employment record. Hired in 2012, promoted to senior deputy in 2016, terminated August 2019 for excessive use of force, but tucked in the back was an incident report with details I hadn't seen online. The driver, Wade, pulled over and ended up in the hospital with a fractured jaw and 3 broken ribs. Unarmed, compliant. 3 witnesses contradicted Wade's claim of resistance. The county settled the lawsuit for $75,000, and Wade was let go. That wasn't just excessive force. That was brutality. The second folder was thicker. Meadowbrook Estates HOA, incorporated 2008. Current board president, Meredith Locke, was elected 21. I flipped through the pages and found something interesting. A complaint filed in 2020, back when Meredith lived in Napa Valley. A neighbor had accused her of harassment, claiming she'd tried to force them to sell their property by filing false code violations and organizing social pressure campaigns. The complaint was dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was there. Meredith had done this before. I closed the folders, thanked the clerk, and walked back to my truck. Wade was violent. Meredith was manipulative. And together, they were targeting me. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd found online the night before. Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, non-emergency line. The dispatcher transferred me to Deputy Luke Merritt. His voice came through clear and professional. "This is Merritt." I introduced myself, told him where I lived, and said I had a question about a former deputy. There was a pause. "Which deputy?" he asked. "Wade Prentiss," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "What about him?" I explained the situation. Wade had shown up at my property wearing a uniform that looked like law enforcement, claiming authority to enforce HOA rules on land that wasn't even in the HOA. He'd threatened me. He'd implied he could take action. Luke's tone shifted. "Did he identify himself as law enforcement?" he asked. "Not directly," I said. "But the uniform, the belt, the way he carried himself, it was all designed to make me think he was a cop." Luke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's impersonation. California Penal Code 538D. If he's wearing a uniform that resembles law enforcement and implying authority he doesn't have, that's a felony. Up to 3 years. Did you record the interaction?" I told him no, but I had a photo and detailed notes. He asked me to send them to his email, and then he said something that made me sit up straighter. "Mr. Ward, I was one of the investigators on Wade's termination case. I know what he's capable of. If he comes back, you call me immediately. Don't engage, don't argue, just call." I promised I would, thanked him, and hung up. I sat in the truck for another moment, looking at my phone. I had an ally now, a real deputy who knew Wade's history and was willing to act. That changed things. When I got home that evening, I checked my email and found a message from an address I didn't recognize. Throwaway account. No name. Just 2 letters in the subject line. MP. I opened it. The message was short. "I work for the HOA. They're planning something bigger. Check your mailbox tonight." Below that, 1 more line. "I got your email from the violation letter files. Someone needs to stop this." That was it. No signature. I deleted the email, walked down to the road, and opened my mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of an internal document. Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Internal memo, marked confidential. Draft for board review. I read it standing there in the fading light. The header said, "Operation Clean Slate. Phase 2. Enforcement." Underneath, in smaller text, "Proposal prepared by Elias Locke for board approval. Pending legal counsel review. Target? Elias Ward property. Goal: forced compliance or acquisition, tactics, daily inspections, citation escalation, and public shaming via community platforms. There was a timeline at the bottom. Phase 1 complete, surveillance and initial contact. Phase 2 begins September 20th. Estimated compliance deadline, October 5th. If non-compliant, proceed to Phase 3, legal action and property lien. It was a draft proposal, something Meredith had written up to present to the board. That's why it was so explicit. She'd laid out her entire strategy in writing, thinking it would stay internal. I folded the paper, walked back to the house, and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. They had a plan. They had phases. They'd reduced my life, my land, my autonomy to a project timeline. And someone inside their organization, someone with access to those files, had just handed me the blueprint. I sat down at my desk, spread the memo out flat, and took a photo of it with my phone. Then I opened my laptop and updated my evidence log. The letter, the photos, the timeline, Wade's employment record, Meredith's complaint history, and now this, Operation Clean Slate. I didn't know who MP was, but they'd just given me exactly what I needed. Proof that this wasn't random harassment. It was a conspiracy. I spent the next morning turning my property into an evidence collection site. The camera system arrived 2 days early. 4 Ring cameras, weatherproof, motion activated, with cloud backup. I mounted the first one on the corner post near the gate, angling it to capture the entrance and the road. The second went on the barn, covering the driveway. The third was on the oak tree, aimed at the vineyard. The fourth is on the porch, covering the house and the eastern fence line. I checked each angle on my phone, adjusted until there were no blind spots. Then I printed a small sign on bright yellow paper and stapled it to the fence post. Notice, this property is under 24-hour video surveillance. By entering, you consent to recording per California Penal Code 632. The body camera came next. Small, clip-on, the kind police officers wear. I charged it, tested it, and clipped it to my flannel shirt. I practiced turning it on with one hand until I could do it smoothly. Click, red light, recording. If Wade came back, I wanted every word on video, not because I was scared, because I was building a case. That afternoon, I drove to Santa Rosa and found the legal aid office on 4th Street, a narrow building wedged between a tax service and a thrift store. The waiting room smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. I signed in and sat down with a clipboard full of intake forms. 20 minutes later, a woman in her early 30s called my name, Chloe Hartman. She wore a dark blazer, black framed glasses, and her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. She looked tired, like she'd been working on too many cases with too few resources. But when I shook her hand, her grip was firm. We sat in a small office with a metal desk and a window that looked out at a brick wall. I laid everything out for her. The HOA letter claims jurisdiction over my property. The photos of Wade in his fake uniform. The internal memo is labeled Operation Clean Slate. Chloe picked up each document, read it carefully, and set it down in a neat stack. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair. Mr. Ward, this is textbook harassment and possible criminal impersonation. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. Let me give you the roadmap. She wrote quickly. Civil Code 4350. An HOA can only enforce rules within its boundaries. If your property is outside their jurisdiction, any enforcement attempt is harassment. You can sue civilly for damages. She tapped her pen on the next line. Your surveillance setup is smart. California requires 2-party consent for recording, but the posted notice changes that. Anyone entering after seeing your sign has consented. Your recordings will be admissible. She looked up. The impersonation issue. Deputy Merritt can handle that better than I can. But if they trespass or threaten you again, call the sheriff immediately. Don't engage. Let law enforcement handle it. Build your documentation first. Then we can file for a restraining order if needed. She slid a business card across the desk. If this escalates, call me. I'll help you file. I thanked her, took the card, and left. When I got back to my truck, I sat in the cab for a minute. Build your case first. That's exactly what I'd been doing. and now I knew the law was on my side. When I got home, I did something I knew would provoke them. I grabbed a dozen bundles of grapevines I'd been meaning to compost and carried them out to the fence line, right where it met Oak Ridge Road. I stacked them in a neat pile, nothing blocking the road, nothing illegal, just dried vines waiting to be mulched. Then I walked back to the barn and climbed into my old John Deere tractor, a 1970s model with rust on the fenders and an engine that coughed black smoke. I drove it down to the gate and parked it just inside the fence, angled so it was visible from the road. It wasn't blocking anything. It wasn't a code violation, but it was rustic. It was unsightly. It was exactly the kind of thing that would drive Meredith Locke crazy. Then I went back to my office, sat down at the desk, and opened the laptop. The 4 camera feeds were displayed in a grid on the screen. Gate, driveway, vineyard, porch. I leaned back in my chair, sipped my coffee, and waited. That evening, I got another email from MP. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Wade and 2 enforcers are coming to inspect your property. Meredith ordered them to apply pressure. Be ready. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed a reply. Thank you. Why are you helping me? The response came 5 minutes later. This isn't what I signed up for. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about whoever MP was, someone with a conscience, someone who'd decided to draw a line. I spent the rest of the night preparing. I charged the body camera again. I printed copies of my warranty deed, the county map showing the HOA boundary, and California Penal Code 602, the trespassing statute. I put everything in a clipboard and set it by the door. Then I opened my phone and saved Luke Merritt's number to my favorites. If Wade tried anything tomorrow, I'd have the real sheriff on speed dial. I checked the cameras one more time. All 4 showed clear feeds. The property was ready. I was ready. I sat on the porch in the dark, looking out at the vineyard. The vines were quiet. The stars were out. Everything looked peaceful, but I knew better. Tomorrow, Wade Prentiss was going to cross a line, and when he did, I'd be ready to make sure it was the last time. They arrived at exactly 10 a.m. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee when I heard the engines. 2 vehicles this time. The black Chevy Tahoe I'd seen before, and a dark blue Ford Explorer right behind it. They pulled up to my gate and stopped, engines idling. I set my coffee down, stood up, and walked slowly toward the fence. The body camera on my chest was already recording. Red light steady. My phone was in my pocket, unlocked, ready. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times, but now that it was happening, my pulse was calm. Steady. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. 3 men stepped out. Wade Prentiss from the Tahoe, wearing the same black polo with Meadowbrook security chief embroidered across the chest. Same tactical belt. Same aviators. Same wide-legged stance. The other 2 came from the Explorer, both younger, maybe late 30s, both wearing identical black polos with security stitched on the back. One was tall and lean, with a shaved head. The other was stocky, with thick arms, a neck like a tree trunk. They moved like a team. Wade in front, the other 2 flanking him. All 3 wore tactical belts, pepper spray, handcuffs, radios, the whole show. Wade stopped at the gate and looked at me through those sunglasses. "Mr. Ward," he said. His voice was loud, deliberate, like he was performing for an audience. "We're here to conduct a property inspection authorized by Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Open the gate." I stayed where I was, about 15 feet back from the fence. I kept my voice calm. "I'm not part of your HOA. This is private property. You're trespassing." I pointed to the yellow sign stapled to the fence post. "That sign informs you that this property is under surveillance. By being here, you've consented to recording. I suggest you leave." Wade smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who thought they held all the cards. "I don't care about your little sign," he said. "We have the authority to enforce community standards. Open the gate, or we'll open it ourselves." The stocky one on the right, the one with the thick arms, pulled something from the Explorer. A bolt cutter, 2 feet long. Red handles, designed to cut through padlocks and chains. He walked up to the gate and held it up so I could see it. Wade nodded toward him. Last chance. Mr. Ward. I pulled out my phone, kept my eyes on Wade, and dialed. The phone rang twice before Luke Merritt answered. Sheriff's office. Merritt speaking. I kept my voice steady. Luke, this is Elias Ward. They're here. 3 men. They're about to cut my gate lock. Wade's one of them. 1. Luke's voice changed instantly. Do not engage. I'm 8 minutes out. Keep your distance. I'm sending backup. I hung up and looked at Wade. The sheriff is on his way, I said. You have about 8 minutes to leave before this becomes a felony. Wade laughed. He actually laughed. You think I'm scared of Luke Merritt? He said. I know Luke. We worked together for years. He's not going to do anything. He gestured to the stocky man with the bolt cutter. Do it! The man stepped forward, positioned the cutter on the padlock, and squeezed. The lock snapped with a metallic crack. The gate swung open. All 3 of them walked onto my property. Wade led the way, his boots crunching on the gravel. The other 2 spread out, one to the left, one to the right, like they were securing a perimeter. Wade stopped about 10 feet from where I stood and hooked his thumbs into his belt. This is official business, he said. Anybody interfering will be arrested for obstruction. He let his hand rest on the handcuff holder, a deliberate gesture. I want you to understand something. Mr. Ward, we're not asking for compliance. We're enforcing it. You've got violations all over this property. That tractor, those vines by the road, that shed, all of it needs to go. You've got 72 hours. I didn't move. I kept my hands at my sides, visible, non-threatening. I looked straight at him and said, You're not a cop anymore. Wade, you don't have arrest powers. You don't have authority. You're trespassing on private property, and you just committed vandalism by cutting that lock. Everything you're doing right now is being recorded. Wade's jaw tightened. The stocky man on my left shifted his weight. The tall one on my right touched his radio like he was about to call someone. Then I heard it. The sound of tires on gravel. Fast. An engine downshifting. I didn't turn around, but Wade did. His face changed. The smile disappeared. A Sonoma County Sheriff's cruiser came roaring up the drive, lights flashing red and blue, and skidded to a stop 20 feet from where we stood. The door opened, and Luke Merritt stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tan uniform with a gold badge on his chest and a pistol on his hip. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, deliberately, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. His eyes were locked on Wade. Wade Prentiss, Luke said. His voice was cold, flat, the kind of voice that doesn't negotiate. Step away from that man. Now. Wade hesitated. For a second, I thought he might actually try to argue, but then he took a step back. The other 2 men froze. Luke kept walking until he was standing between me and Wade. He glanced at the broken lock on the gate, then back at Wade. You just broke onto private property. You're wearing a uniform designed to look like law enforcement. You're carrying restraint devices, and you threatened this man with arrest. He pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Wade's face went red. Luke, this is HOA business. We're authorized to enforce community standards. This guy isn't even cooperating. Luke didn't blink. You're not authorized to do anything. Wade, you're not a cop. You haven't been a cop for 5 years. That uniform, that belt, those cuffs, all of it is designed to make people think you have authority you don't have. That's impersonation. California Penal Code 538D. Turn around. Now. Wade's hands were shaking. He looked at the other 2 men like he was expecting backup, but they both took a step back, hands raised. Wade turned to Luke, and his voice cracked. I was just doing what Meredith Locke told me to do. She's the one who hired me. She's the one who said to apply pressure. She told me this guy was a problem, and we needed to deal with it. There it was. The confession. On camera. On record. Wade had just admitted that Meredith had ordered him to do this. Luke grabbed Wade's arm and spun him around, snapping the cuffs on his wrists. You have the right to remain silent, Luke said. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. He kept going through the Miranda warning while Wade stood there, red-faced, breathing hard. The other 2 men were already backing toward the explorer. Luke looked at them. You 2, "Stay right there." Another cruiser pulled up, lights flashing, and a younger deputy stepped out. I stood there, watching it all unfold. My heart pounding now, not from fear, but from something else. Relief. Vindication. The body camera was still recording. My phone was still in my hand. And I realized I'd been live streaming the whole thing on my personal account. I glanced at the screen. 847 viewers. Live. In real time. People were watching Wade Prentiss get arrested. People were hearing him confess that Meredith Locke had ordered this. And somewhere, in one of those 200 houses in Meadowbrook Estates, Meredith Locke was probably watching too. Luke walked Wade to the cruiser and put him in the back seat. He came back over to me, his face serious. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm fine. Thank you." He looked at the broken gate, then at the camera on my chest. "You got all of that?" I nodded again. "Every second." He almost smiled. "Good, because Wade just handed us a felony case on a silver platter. I'm going to need copies of everything. The video, the photos, all your documentation. I'll make sure you get them," I said. Luke walked back to the cruiser. The other deputy was taking statements from the two men who'd come with Wade. I stood there in the middle of my driveway, watching the red and blue lights flash across the vineyard. The gate was broken. The gravel was torn up by all the vehicles. But I'd won. Wade was in handcuffs. Meredith's plan was falling apart, and the whole thing was on video. I pulled out my phone and ended the live stream. 1,200 viewers now. The comments were pouring in. People were asking what was happening. People say they lived in Meadowbrook. People are saying they'd been harassed by the HOA, too. I turned off the screen and looked up at the sky. It was clear. Blue. The kind of day that felt like justice. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m. that same evening, Wednesday, September 18th. I wasn't invited, but the meetings were technically open to the public. I found the notice on Meadowbrook's website while I was uploading video files to a secure folder for Luke Merritt. Emergency session, Community Center, 7 p.m., topic. Response to recent incident involving security staff. The language was careful, sanitized, like they were discussing a minor personnel issue instead of a felony arrest. I saved the live stream video to a thumb drive, packed my laptop into a bag, and printed 3 copies of the Operation Clean Slate memo. Then I drove down to Meadowbrook Estates. The community center sat at the heart of the neighborhood, a low building with white siding and big windows. The parking lot was packed. I parked at the far end and walked toward the entrance. People were filing in, talking in low voices. I recognized a few faces. Mara Devlin was standing near the door. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. "Elias," she said quietly. "Are you sure you want to be here?" I nodded. "I'm sure." The meeting room was bigger than I expected. Rows of folding chairs, maybe 200 of them, and almost every seat was full. At the front was a long table with 5 chairs, the HOA board. Meredith Locke sat in the center, wearing a gray blazer and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was shuffling papers, trying to look composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The other board members looked uncomfortable. None of them was looking at Meredith. I found a seat near the back and set my laptop bag on the floor. The room buzzed with conversation. People were talking about the video. I pulled out my phone and checked the stats. 2,300 views, 47 shares. It had spread fast. Meredith called the meeting to order at 7:05. She tapped a gavel on the table, and the room quieted. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on short notice. Tonight, we need to address an unfortunate incident involving our security team. Mr. Wade Prentiss, our head of security, was involved in an altercation earlier today that resulted in his arrest. I want to assure you that Mr. Prentiss acted independently, beyond the scope of his authority. We are fully cooperating with law enforcement and have terminated his employment effective immediately." Someone in the front row raised a hand. A man, maybe 60, balding, wearing a windbreaker. "That's not what the video shows. The video shows him saying you told him to do it." Meredith's smile tightened. "I can assure you that any statements made under duress are not reliable. Wade was upset. He said things that weren't true. The man didn't sit down. I'm talking about the live stream," Wade said. And I quote, "Meredith Locke told me to apply pressure. He said you hired him to deal with the problem. People talked over each other. Is that true? Did you order him to do that? Meredith held up a hand. Please, everyone. Wade misunderstood his role. He was hired to conduct routine inspections, not to engage in enforcement actions. Another voice from the middle of the room. Then why is there a memo called Operation Clean Slate? Meredith froze. Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice wavered. I stood up. The room turned to look at me. I pulled my laptop out of the bag, walked down the center aisle, and stopped in front of the board table. My name is Elias Ward, I said. I own the vineyard property 200 feet east of this HOA's boundary. For the past week, your security team has been harassing me, surveilling my property, and threatening me with fines and enforcement actions, all for violations I don't have because I'm not part of your HOA. Meredith's face went from pale to red. Mr. Ward, you're not a member of this association. You don't have the right to speak here. I looked at her calmly. These meetings are open to the public. I checked, and I think your members have a right to know what their HOA president has been doing in their name. I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector at the front of the room, and pulled up the video file. This is from this morning. It shows Wade Prentiss breaking onto my property, cutting my gate lock, and threatening me with arrest. It also shows Wade confessing that you ordered him to do it. I hit play. The room went silent. Wade's voice filled the speakers. We have the authority to enforce community standards. Open the gate, or we'll open it ourselves. The bolt cutter snapped the lock. Wade was walking onto my property. This is official business. Anybody interfering will be arrested. Then Luke Merritt arrived. Wade's face is changing. And finally, the confession. I was just doing what Meredith Locke told me to do. She's the one who hired me. She told me this guy was a problem, and we needed to deal with it. The video ended. I pulled up the next file. This is an internal memo I received from someone inside your organization. It's titled Operation Clean Slate. Phase 2. Enforcement. I started reading aloud. Target. Elias Ward property. Goal force compliance or acquisition. Tactics. Daily inspections. Citation escalation. And public shaming via community platforms. I looked up at Meredith. This isn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated campaign to force me off my land. Land that isn't even in your jurisdiction. Meredith stood up, her hands shaking. That document was taken out of context. It was never approved by the board. An older woman in the third row stood up. I'm on the board. Meredith, you never showed us that memo. None of us approved anything like that. The man in the plaid shirt stood up too. I didn't know anything about this. Then, from the back of the room, another voice. I can confirm it. Miles Pritchard stood up. Thin, nervous, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. I work as the HOA secretary. Meredith asked me to draft that memo 3 weeks ago. She told me to find legal loopholes to pressure Mr. Ward. She said if we couldn't force him to comply, we'd make his life miserable until he sold. Meredith's face went white. Miles, you're fired. Miles cut her off. I quit this morning. I already sent all the emails and documents to the county district attorney. One of the board members, the woman with short hair, stood up and faced Meredith. I moved that Meredith Locke be removed as president, effective immediately. The older woman seconded it. All in favor. 4 hands went up. The vote was 4-0. Meredith stood there, shaking. You can't do this, she said. The woman in glasses looked at her coldly. You abused your authority. You hired a violent ex-cop to intimidate a neighbor. You're done. Meredith grabbed her papers and walked out. The room was silent as the door slammed behind her. I stood there at the front, my laptop still open, and looked at the faces staring back at me. Mara Devlin started clapping, slowly at first. Then others joined. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. I closed my laptop, nodded once, and walked out. The district attorney's office called me 2 days after the HOA meeting. Sarah Vaughn, deputy DA, her voice professional and direct. Mr. Ward, we've reviewed all the evidence you submitted. Video, photos, documentation, and the internal memo. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen. We're moving forward with charges against Wade Prentiss and opening an investigation into Meredith Locke. I'd like you to come in and give a formal statement. I drove to the DA's office in Santa Rosa that afternoon and spent 3 hours walking through everything. The timeline, the surveillance, Wade's threats, the gate is being cut, the confession on video. Sarah took notes, asked clarifying questions, and when we finished, she leaned back in her chair. Mr. Ward, Wade Prentiss is looking at 3 felony counts: impersonating a peace officer, criminal trespassing, and vandalism. If convicted, he's facing serious time. As for Meredith Locke, we're building a conspiracy case. With Miles Pritchard's testimony and the internal documents, she'll face charges too. I asked her how long the process would take. She said Wade's preliminary hearing was scheduled for early October, about 3 weeks away. Meredith's case would take longer. Conspiracy charges required more evidence, more witnesses. But she was confident. People like this, she said, they always leave a trail, and you documented every step. That's what's going to put them away. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Sonoma County Superior Court for Wade Prentiss's preliminary hearing. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, with rows of benches and a judge's bench at the front. Wade sat at the defense table wearing an orange jail uniform, hands cuffed in front of him. His public defender, a tired-looking man named Jared Mills, sat beside him, shuffling papers. I sat in the back row next to Luke Merritt, who'd been subpoenaed as a witness. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Barbara Reynolds entered. She was in her mid-50s, with gray hair pulled back, black robes, and a no-nonsense expression that made it clear she didn't tolerate games. The prosecutor, an assistant DA named Robert Chen, stood and presented the charges. Count 1, impersonating a peace officer in violation of Penal Code 538D. Count 2, criminal trespass 602. Count 3, vandalism in violation of Penal Code 594. He played the video on a screen at the front of the courtroom. The whole thing. Wade is cutting the lock. Wade is threatening arrest. Wade confessed to Luke that Meredith had ordered him to do it. The courtroom was silent except for Wade's voice echoing from the speakers. When the video ended, Judge Reynolds looked at Wade. "Mr. Prentiss, did you identify yourself as law enforcement to Mr. Ward?" Wade's lawyer started to object, but Wade spoke first. "No, Your Honor. I said I was security." Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "But you wore a uniform designed to resemble law enforcement. You carried handcuffs, pepper spray, and a radio. You used language implying arrest powers, and you entered private property after being told you had no authority." Wade looked down. His lawyer tried to argue. "Your Honor, my client was misled by HOA President Meredith Locke. He believed he had legal authority to conduct inspections." Judge Reynolds cut him off. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense. Mr. Mills, your client is a former deputy sheriff. He knows exactly what constitutes impersonation." She set bail at $50,000 and scheduled the trial for mid-November. Wade was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Luke leaned over and whispered, "He's not making bail. He'll sit in county jail until trial, and with that video, he'll plead out." I nodded. "Good." 4 days later, Meredith Locke was arrested. I didn't see it happen, but Mara Devlin called me that afternoon. "Elias," she said, "they just took Meredith away in handcuffs. 2 sheriff's deputies came to her house this morning. She tried to argue with them, but they put her in the car and drove off. The whole neighborhood saw it." Mara sounded relieved, almost giddy. "People have been talking about nothing else. Half the HOA wants to apologize to you. The other half is just embarrassed that they ever supported her. Meredith's arraignment was scheduled for the following week. I didn't attend, but Sarah Vaughn called me afterward. She's been charged with conspiracy to commit harassment and criminal intimidation. It's a misdemeanor, but it carries jail time and fines. She posted bail, and she's out. But her reputation is destroyed. The HOA formally banned her from any leadership role for 10 years. She's done." 2 months later, the cases were resolved. Wade Prentiss took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to impersonating a peace officer and criminal trespass. The vandalism charge was dropped. In exchange, he was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, and a permanent ban on wearing any uniform resembling law enforcement. Judge Reynolds made it clear during sentencing, "Mr. Prentiss, you abused the public's trust in law enforcement. You used your former position to intimidate an innocent man. You will serve every day of this sentence." Wade stood there, shoulders slumped, and said nothing. Meredith Locke also took a plea. She pleaded no contest to misdemeanor conspiracy to commit harassment. She was sentenced to a $10,000 fine, 200 hours of community service, and a 10-year ban from serving in any HOA leadership position in California. The judge also ordered her to write a formal apology to me, which she did. It arrived in the mail 3 weeks later, a single typed page that said she regretted the situation and acknowledged her actions were inappropriate. It didn't feel sincere, but I didn't care. It was over. The HOA itself reached out through their new president, Mara Devlin. She called me in early December and asked if we could meet. We sat on my porch with glasses of wine, and she handed me an envelope. "The board voted unanimously to compensate you for damages," she said. $15,000 for the gate, the cameras, the legal fees, and the distress we caused. We're also issuing a formal public apology. I opened the envelope and looked at the check. I set it on the table. "Thank you," I said. Mara nodded. "Elias, I'm sorry. A lot of us knew Meredith was difficult, but we didn't think she'd go this far. We should have stood up sooner." I looked out at the vineyard. "It's done now," I said. "That's what matters." A week later, I stood on the steps of the county courthouse with Luke Merritt beside me. The morning was cold, the sky clear and blue. Luke shook my hand. "Justice served," he said. I nodded. It wasn't just about winning. It was about knowing the system worked when you had the truth on your side. I walked back to my truck, the judgment papers in my hand, and I thought about the last 3 months. The surveillance, the threats, the fear that someone could take what was mine just because they wanted control. But they hadn't, because I'd stood my ground, because I'd documented everything, because I'd trusted the law. I drove back to the vineyard, parked under the oak tree, and walked out into the rows of vines. The grapes were dormant now, the leaves gone, the wood bare and waiting for spring. It was quiet again, the kind of quiet I'd built this life for. And this time, no one was watching. 3 months after the trial, my property looked like it had before all of this started. Better, actually. The new gate was solid steel, powder-coated black, with an electronic keypad lock that required a 6-digit code. No more padlocks that could be cut. No more vulnerability. I'd installed it myself over a weekend in early December, welding the hinges to reinforced posts sunk 3 feet into concrete. Above the gate, I mounted a new sign. Hand-carved oak, routed letters painted white. Ward Family Vineyard. Established 1018. Private property. Simple. Clear. Mine. I stood there on a cold January morning, coffee in hand, and looked at it. The gate was more than functional. It was a statement. This land wasn't up for negotiation. It had never been. The cameras were still there, all 4 of them, but I'd added motion-sensing floodlights near the barn and along the fence line. At night, the property lit up like a small fortress if anyone came close. Not because I was paranoid, because I'd learned that prevention was smarter than reaction. The vineyard itself had survived the chaos untouched. The vines didn't care about HOA disputes or fake cops or courtroom drama. They just grew. I'd spent the last month pruning them back for the winter, cutting away the old wood, preparing for spring. There was something meditative about it. Cutting away what didn't serve, keeping what mattered. Mara Devlin called me in late January with an invitation I hadn't expected. "Elias," she said, "we're organizing a community reconciliation event, a barbecue at the park. We want to," she paused, "reset things. A lot of people feel awful about what happened. They want a chance to apologize, to move forward." I told her I'd think about it. 2 days later, I called her back and said yes. Not because I needed their apologies, because holding on to anger would have given Meredith more power than she deserved. The barbecue was held on a Saturday afternoon in early February. The weather was clear, cold, but sunny. The kind of Northern California winter day that almost felt like spring. I drove into Meadowbrook for the first time since the HOA meeting and parked near the community center. The park behind it was full of people. Picnic tables covered with checkered tablecloths. Grills are smoking with burgers and hot dogs. Kids running around on the grass. Music is playing from a portable speaker. It looked like any other neighborhood gathering, except everyone there knew what had happened. I brought 2 bottles of wine from last year's harvest. Pinot Noir in simple brown bottles with handwritten labels. Mara met me at the entrance to the park and hugged me. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this isn't easy." I handed her the bottles. She smiled and led me to one of the tables where a group of neighbors were standing. Some I recognized, some I didn't. An older man with silver hair stepped forward and offered his hand. "Mr. Ward, I'm Tom Brennan. I live 3 streets over. I wanted to say I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. A lot of us were intimidated by Meredith. We should have stood with you from the beginning." I shook his hand. "It's done now," I said. "That's what matters." A woman in her 40s approached next, holding a little girl's hand. "Mr. Ward, I'm Jennifer Hayes. My daughter wanted to meet you. She saw the video, and she's been talking about courage ever since." The little girl looked up at me, wide-eyed. "Are you the man who stood up to the bad people?" she asked. I crouched down to her level. "I'm the man who didn't let anyone push me around," I said. "And you don't have to either." She smiled and ran off to join the other kids. Jennifer thanked me, her eyes a little wet, and walked away. This went on for the next hour. People coming up, shaking my hand, apologizing, thanking me. I didn't say much. I just nodded, accepted their words, and moved on. I wasn't there to lecture anyone. I was there to show them that holding people accountable wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. It was about knowing when to say enough. Toward the end of the afternoon, I saw Miles Pritchard standing near the edge of the park, away from the crowd. He looked thinner than I remembered, nervous. When he saw me looking, he walked over slowly. "Mr. Ward," he said quietly. I wasn't sure if I should come. I told him he had every right to be here. He'd done the right thing. He nodded, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "It's a resume," he said. "I know I don't deserve to ask, but I'm looking for work. Accounting, records management, anything really. I've been applying everywhere, but no one wants to hire the guy who worked for the HOA." I took the paper and unfolded it. His credentials were solid. Associate's degree in business, 3 years of bookkeeping experience. I folded it back up and looked at him. "I don't need a full-time assistant," I said. "But harvest season starts in September. I'll need someone to manage orders, handle invoicing, and keep the books. If you're willing to learn the wine business, you can start then." Miles's face lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Ward. I won't let you down." I believed him. I left the barbecue around 4 p.m. and drove back to the vineyard. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I walked out to the porch and sat in the old wooden chair I'd had since I bought the place. The sun was starting to dip behind the western ridge, painting the sky orange and pink. I poured myself a glass of the Pinot I'd made last year and set it on the small table beside me. Next to it, I placed my black notebook, the one I'd kept throughout the whole ordeal. Every date, every event, every piece of evidence. I didn't need it anymore, but I wasn't throwing it away either. It was proof, not just of what had happened, but of what I'd survived. On the other side of the glass sat a small framed photo, Luke Merritt and I on the courthouse steps after Wade's sentencing, shaking hands. Someone had taken the picture and emailed it to me. I'd printed it and kept it, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Justice wasn't loud. It was patient. It was documented. It was earned. I sat there as the sun set, the vineyard stretching out in front of me in neat rows. The vines were bare now, dormant, waiting for the warmth of spring to bring them back to life. I thought about what Meredith and Wade had tried to do. They'd tried to make me believe that power came from uniforms, from titles, from the ability to intimidate. But real power came from something else, from standing still when people wanted you to run, from knowing the rules better than the people trying to break them, from refusing to be moved when you knew you were right. The next morning, I opened my email and saw a message from the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors. Subject line, HOA Oversight Regulations Review. The message was short. Mr. Ward, we're reviewing HOA oversight regulations countywide, inspired by your case. We'd like to invite you to testify at a public hearing next month. Your experience could help us create better protections for property owners. Would you be willing to participate? I read it twice, then typed a one-word reply. Yes, I closed the laptop and walked outside. The vineyard was quiet. The morning mist was just starting to lift. I stood at the gate, the new steel gate with my family name carved above it, and I looked out at the land I'd fought to keep. The quiet wasn't fragile anymore. It wasn't something that could be taken away by a letter in a mailbox or a man in a fake uniform. It was solid. It was earned. It was mine. If you've ever felt powerless against someone who thought they had authority over you, remember this. Documentation beats intimidation. Patience beats aggression. And standing your ground, calmly and legally, beats running of every single time. The system works when you know how to use it. If this story reminded you that justice isn't about who yells loudest, but who stands firmest, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below about a time you stood your ground, or subscribe to Karma Fence for more stories about people who refused to back down when power tried to push them around. These stories matter. Your story matters. And sometimes, the quiet act of standing still is the loudest statement